Hello everyone, I'm Alex and this is Tank Tested 2. And in front of me is a blank sheet of paper. Today we're going to be illustrating a discus fish. And to give you some context as to what I'm actually creating, these are not that blank. We're going to actually start by showing you a couple of images. First off, we've got this Asian Arowana. So, this Asian Arowana, I've started illustrating. It's not completed yet, but it's close. And I will zoom in, and you can see it a little bit clearer, hopefully. So this is all done with colored pencils. And I really love this little setup. It's only about, about 8 inches in length. Then we've also got this Corridora. Each one of these illustrations takes me around 20 hours to make. So this is not a fast process, but this little Corridora I think is really, really pretty. Let's see if I can give you the best possible view of it. If I transition to a wide shot, and then I'll adjust my focus so you can see exactly what we're looking at. So let's see. Bear with me. So there you go. You can kind of see it. It's got hopefully a really vibrant, lifelike personality. And then lastly, just to give you some reference point, we've got this Cardinal Tetra. So I love this Cardinal Tetra. This is one of my favorite pieces that I've created. It's about a 6-inch replica of a Cardinal Tetra, and it's, I think, pretty realistic. If I were to put it in a lifelike scene, I think that you would be hard-pressed to realize that it wasn't real if you were standing more than a few feet away. So I really love that. Today, though, we're starting from scratch. So let me see if I can get our focus perfect. So I have this blank sheet of paper, and today we're going to be illustrating a discus fish. Now, I should have done this beforehand, but I'll be back in just a moment. I want to see if I can find a reference photo of a discus fish that you can see. So I'll be back in maybe 20 seconds. Well, I was optimistic. I thought that I had a lovely book of fish from South America, but I actually have a couple of books from South America that are all specialized into specific regions, and none of them are the rivers that the discus lives in. So you'll just have to trust me when I say that I'm drawing a discus fish. So Andre asks, wild or hybrid discus? So I'm going to be illustrating a wild discus today. Now, I really loved the process of researching discus fish for this project, and it made me really want to do a series of these, maybe 6 of them on 6 different types of hybrid discus or captive bred discus. But For now, I'm starting off with Wild Discus, specifically brown discus. And that's because I want to capture what I saw when I went down to the Rio Negro about a year and a half ago. And I really, really love the wild type brown discus fish. I think they're beautiful. They still have vibrant fluorescent blue. I'm not sure that fluorescent's the right term. Luminescent blue, as well as a deep brown that's actually more of a mix of orange and reds. They're really, really beautiful, and then they've got a bunch of yellow as well. But before we get into the coloring, and I do have just a ton of pencils here. I've got about 140 colored pencils. So lots of things to work with. Before we get into that, I've got to build the skeleton of my fish. I've got to find the edges. And that's why there's a grid here. So if I go to the close-up here, you'll see this grid. This is a 1 by 1 inch grid. And the goal here is to be able to authentically replicate what the discus fish's shape actually is. I'm not interested in creating an artistic rendition and putting my own spin on the fish. I want something that looks as similar as possible to the real thing. And to do that, I've used the grid. The grid, I think, is the easiest way to make that happen. So right below the camera, I have a Photoshop document pulled up. And there, I've created a grid. I went through, scoured the internet, and lovely people post bunches of their discus photos. So I was able to go through hundreds, thousands probably, of discus photos and come up with the ones that had the most ideal shape. And that's actually a little bit more challenging than you might think, because a lot of people keep juvenile discus fish, and because discus are harder to keep, a lot of people that are great photographers may not be great fish keepers. So they end up taking pictures of their discus when they're, maybe 5 inches in size. And they're absolutely an adult, but they're not a full beefy adult. And then the photos of really, really mature discus fish get rarer and rarer. So it took some work to find a discus that really had the meat on it that I wanted. But I found a bunch of discus, and then I'm not going to share it with you because these are all copyrighted images that I'm basing my structure on. Then I pieced them together to get the right fins, the right everything that I wanted so that I can replicate it on this sheet of paper. So as I mentioned, this process takes a really, really long time. So I'm not promising this is going to be the most exciting video in the world, but I've been putting off doing this for a while, and I thought, you know what? I'll do it live on this second channel, and if people like it, they like it, and if people don't like it, that's okay. You don't have to stick around. I'm not going to be offended if you migrate away. So, with that, the white of this paper is 6 3/4 by 10.5 inches across. So I'm left with not a lot of real estate for a very round fish, but I think, let me just count here what I've marked it out as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's about 6 1/4 inches from tail to snout, which is a little bit smaller than real life. Very different than my Cardinal Tetra, which is way bigger than real life. And it looks like it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5.5 tall. So pretty close to circular, but not quite. So how I go about this process. And some people might think that this is cheating. I'm just like kind of carbon copying. There's no tracing going on. This is all just a lot of prep work to make sure that I am as authentic as I can be. So what I do is I go and I mark the transition points of where the edge of a fish, or the edge of the fish, is crossing one of these grid lines. And then I can start building out the actual silhouette. So we'll start 1, 2, 3. So we've got a little bit of a cross right here. You really can't see that, and I apologize for that. But maybe on a bigger screen you can see it a little bit. And then, so right now I'm illustrating the dorsal fin. So I'm going to start with the dorsal. It's going to come around here. Then you've got the spines of the dorsal, and then we're going to circle back around to the anal fin and the caudal fin, or the tail fin. I say that. We'll see whether or not that's what I actually stick with. So this one is about halfway, a little bit less than halfway. This one is a little bit down there. And iridescent. Iridescent is the right word. So I appreciate you pointing that out. Iridescent blue. You have to come to my city, Lisbon, Portugal. We have the biggest nature. I mean, believe me, before the lockdown, I had every intention of Lisbon being my next location that I wanted to go to. I've wanted to see that beautiful giant nature aquarium for a long time, and I also wanted to tack on visiting 5 or 6 really top level scapers in Portugal and Spain and filming their aquascapes. So I really had aspirations of doing that. I still do, but it seems more and more likely that it'll be 2022 before that happens. But it is very high on my to-do list. And thank you, Andre, for being a patron of me. I really appreciate that. All right, so in the interest of trying to get something done, I'm going to continue with my little marking stuff off. All right, this is about there. It's a little bit closer to center than that. This is a little bit higher than center. So the nice thing about the grid system is that I don't have to think that hard about following a certain path. I don't have to make sure that my line doesn't wander, because I've really limited the ability for anything to wander. I've given myself really, really specific directions, which is put a dot every time something intersects with a grid, and then go from there. It's definitely, I'm envious of people that can draw without reference. I'm not one of those people, and I'm okay with that. It's really impressive to watch someone freeform or freehand something without having any distortion. But if you're not one of those people, I find this system works really, really well. So right now, we're reaching the bottom or the belly of the discus fish. There's a fin that comes down to about there, looks like. And a lot of these fins I've kind of futzed with. So the ventral fins, which is what I'm marking right now, I couldn't really find one that had its ventral fins in the right position that I wanted to have it. So I, basically just photoshopped a bunch of images together to make that work. So now we'll go back up to the anal fin. Looks like it crosses about there. And these fins are tough because they have translucent spines, and the fins get really quite translucent as they reach the end of that tissue. So finding like where is the hard point where that fin crosses the line is a little bit challenging. Sometimes I'm being too generous, and sometimes I'm being a little bit stingy in terms of giving the fin too much or too little weight. All right. So this one looks like it's about 40% up. So we're now coming back up to the tail fin, caudal fin. It's got a little bit of cross there. And then comes back down here. it's been really interesting looking at all these pictures of discus fish, and I know that there's not a lot going on the sheet right now, but looking at pictures of discus fish, how they don't swim nearly as level as I imagined they would swim. I've kept discus fish, but I always imagined that they were pretty level swimmers. But looking at hundreds of photos, it's very clear that they tend to swim with their body pointed downward just a little bit. I'm adjusting that. I'm bringing it a little bit closer to level. But their eye is still quite a bit below their peduncle of their tail fin. The peduncle is the narrowest point of a limb, essentially. It's the area where there's more stuff on either side. And their peduncle is actually a little bit higher than their eye, which is not what I expected. That's just not how I imagined discus fish were shaped. So good to actually like study the work that you're doing rather than making assumptions, because man, unless you start really measuring stuff out, your assumptions really get in the way. So I'm gonna just start lightly tracing out these lines. So I'm using a number 3 or a 3B pencil to do this. And in the future, I will basically erase all of that down to almost nothing. So I'm not pressing very hard. This is just a reference point for when I start coloring in. I did some initial sketches about 6 months ago. And in those initial sketches, I actually did outlining. And when I did those outlining, everything turned cartoony. And I did not like that. I wanted something that felt a little bit more like a scientific illustration than kind of a cartoon version of a fish. So I need to zoom in a little bit here, because fish are a lot lumpier than you imagine. So it looks like right about here there's a point where it comes down. That. And I don't know. In the future, I may do more of these where I start further on in the process so that you can really see what I'm doing, rather than this initial part where I'm just kind of sketching stuff out. Especially because when you're sketching stuff out, it requires a lot more brain power than when you're just kind of like coloring stuff in. When you're coloring stuff in, all you really care about is capturing the color and the shading. But if you mess up this initial part, the initial bit being when you're sketching your shape, it doesn't matter how good your shading is. Your shape is kind of butchered from the start. So let's see, just zoom in a little bit. Let's see how the stream is doing, just making sure that it's still operational. Cool. I'm glad to see that there are a couple people still sticking around. Hopefully this isn't the worst content. It's not the best, but hopefully it's not the worst. So ventral fins down here, comes down like that. And then it continues basically in a slight curve all the way down to there. And then you have the start of the anal fin over here. There are a couple of spines which I'll come back to, and I'll fill them in a moment. But so this kind of like curves up like that, meets up with the body of the fish, which is really kind of up here, it looks like. So I think I've gone with too strong a curve. There we go. And then we've got our fin that comes down like that. Okay. So this Anal fin really drops down really quickly. Oh, I should have said, I've decided to illustrate a male discus fish just because I like the difference between male and female discus fish. Females are a little bit smaller, they're a little bit more petite, but the big difference is the back of the fish. The back fins of the female are more rounded, whereas the back fins of the male are more angular. And because this is such a round fish, I think the angular nature of its back fins will be a little bit more compelling. So I've decided to go with a male for this illustration. In terms of color, they're very, very similar. So there's no like disadvantage to keeping females over males in terms of the color of the fish in your tank. But, you know, from an artistic point of view, I think the males are a little bit more interesting looking. So this comes up like this. As we go through this process, I'm going to start adding a few tears to some of these fins. You know, in a perfect world, the fish has no tears in its fins at all, but we don't live in a perfect world, and if you want something to look real, part of the key of it looking real is having it look lived in, you know, allowing it to be a little bit imperfect. So now you can see that that corner of the anal fin is quite angular relative to the rest of the fish. And it actually comes all the way to about here. It looks like 3/4 of the way over here and about 1/3 of the way up. It comes up to about there. And there's a little bit of an overlap with the tail. So the tail is a little bit bigger or broader as it spreads out. So it will cover up a little bit of that fin. I'll come back to the, well, I guess I'll continue with the tail. So the tail comes down, kind of just reaches, again, a little bit angular. I'm seeing this is a little bit too stout. So it comes like that. And then there's a little bit of a wave, but again, we'll fix that wave a little bit later. The fin, or the tail, comes up to, gosh, about here. And is, again, quite a bit more angular than you would see in a female. And then it reaches the peduncle again, and the peduncle of the tail is right about here. Okay. So a little bit of a curve that happens as we start with the dorsal fin, and then it comes right up. I drew it a little bit too feminine. It's really more angular than I illustrated it. Okay, and then the top dorsal fin, which is really, I think, the strongest giveaway that this is a male. You have a strong corner here, and then it continues up in a curve. And in a female, that would be more rounded, like that. In fact, oftentimes there's a little bit of an upward curve that really accentuates that corner. This comes up like this, right around this apex is where the spines start to deviate. The dorsal fin is made up of a bunch of spines, but those top spines, they raise up and they're they're kind of a defense mechanism against being swallowed by larger fish. So they're individual spines that will stab into you if you grab onto them. Kind of like a sunfish, or any type of fish that you might be catching as a sport fish. So this comes around like this. And then we curve down here. Let's see. Very close to finishing the initial outline of this fish. All right, so right around here, there's a little lump, and then the spines come up. So that's our outline of a discus fish. So I will cut to the full screen of that. I mean, not that it's a huge difference, but you can see that that's the outline of our discus fish. Now I'm going to start filling in all of the interior so that I have reference points. Because I'm going to erase this whole grid, and I need to make sure that all of the patterning and all of the other body parts that need to be in this fish, like the pectoral fin and the eye and the gill cover, all of that is properly placed, as well as the dorsal ridge. And the only way to do that is to mark that out now, plus where the edges of the fins are. So I will leave this full screen for a moment while we start the process of marking out where its fins transition. And the discus fish is kind of a really interesting fish in this capacity as well, because it doesn't have nearly the defined transition line from the body of the fish to the fins that most fish have. So I'm going to mark right where you see where the spines just start to disappear, and they transition into the normal plated oh no, the things that fish have, scales. There we go. Oof. All right, so if we go down here, looks like this happens around this point. Okay. That's a little bit more curved than I've made it. And looks like it comes right around here and right around here. No. Actually, it comes right around here. Obviously, this line is a little bit weird. Okay. So this is the edge of where the spines of the fin are last visible. But where the fin transitions into a thin membrane, which I should look up exactly what this transition point is called. I'm going to mark that as well. If anyone knows what this transition point is called, where you go from something that's a little bit fin-like to something that's just the true membrane and no fatty tissue, leave that in the comments. I would love to have a jumping off point when I'm researching that. So this happens about here. This happens about here. And All right, so that's my transition period. So you can start to see where the actual body of the fish is. Let's just make sure that my stream is still going. Ginger says, hello all. Hi, it's nice to see you. Gosh, 30 minutes in and all I've got is a little sketch of a fish. I mean, I'm not saying that this is compelling streaming content. This is just me doing kind of my homework of making these illustrations. I won't get into like exactly what my game plan for these is just yet, but I do have an end game for these because I really love doing them and I want an excuse to continue doing them. They're providing me a lot of calm, but you know, I have a lot of projects that I'm navigating, both stuff that's involved in Tank Tested and also other mysterious projects that are more job related of films that I'm editing behind the scenes that keep me occupied. So this is a lovely little way to kind of give me some calm. So this actually really is right about there. So that's the top of the spine, the bottom of the spine. Spines are about here, 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 then about here, and right there. Is there any strange curve to it? There is kind of a little bit of a weird curve. Okay, so this interior section is the shape of the fish. Everything outside of this interior is kind of just frill. I mean, it's the frill that helps it swim, but frill nonetheless. And then let's go over to the peduncle, which I've said more times in this stream than, you know, probably most people will ever say in their entire life. The peduncle, the narrow point here, looks like it comes right around there. It's the transition point. Okay. So that's the meat of the fish. Now, where is the eye? So the eye looks like it starts at about 20% below that line, ends just below the halfway point, and then comes out about 40%. So that's the parameters of the eye. I know that you can't really see that. Okay, that's the eye. I'll draw a little iris, or not iris, the other part of the eye, the center of the eye. I guess I'm also drawing an iris. I'm distinguishing the two. So we'll just say that what I'm really focusing on is drawing the exterior of this circle, not the interior, because my mind is blanking. So now I just need to also illustrate the, let's see, I need the gill cover, and I need the pectoral fin, are two major things, and then I need the dorsal ridge as well, the lateral line. So the gill cover, Looks like it kind of meets right here. There. There. And it comes all the way down to right about there. And none of these lines are terribly consistent. They all kind of like are compound curves that shift and bend organically. They're not like, I think when you think of the gill cover, a lot of people just draw them like that, and that's just not really accurate to how they actually work. They're a lot more complex than that. Kind of come out like this, which reminds me a lot of how, again, sunfish gill covers kind of operate. So then we've got our pectoral fin right about here. Got the meat of the pectoral fin kind of right like that. And then the actual fin itself, which is another artifact that I had to kind of like find the right pectoral fin, because I wanted something that was flat to the body, and with proper resolution, so that I could see exactly how all of those spines kind of bifurcate as they get closer and closer to the tip of the fin. I think that's one of the more interesting things, having done these illustrations, how complex the fins of fish really are. I think that before I did this, I knew that they were more complicated than I was giving them credit for, but I didn't really think about how actually complicated they really were. That there is actually a lot going on. Okay. Is that right? It feels like that needs to drop down a little bit and flatten out sooner. There we go. That feels more accurate. All right. So there we go. We've got something like a discus fish. Let's see how we're doing. Noel says, I'm a doctor, so I get to say peduncle more than most. Yeah, that would make sense. I first heard the term peduncle. A friend of mine was working on a short film about manatees, and Nat Geo has something called Critter Cam, where Nat Geo will attach a camera to an animal of some sort. And the key with that is to attach it in a way that's not disruptive to how they move, and also not painful to the animal, and also not permanent. The best way to attach a camera to an animal is on a peduncle, the same way that you attach a collar to a dog on its neck. That's a narrow part that connects two larger bits. And the example that the Critter Cam people were using of attaching a camera to was a manatee. That they, like the fish, they have this tail that's a narrow part, so you can attach a tracking device or even a camera to that part of the manatee, and no matter what the manatee does, it's not going to be able to get it loose. So you attach it with a tracking beacon, you know exactly where it is, and then after you've gotten all of your data, you can come out and you can collect that manatee and detach whatever you've attached to its peduncle, and it goes on its little way. So, a little aside of the world of why that's such a fun term in my brain. So yeah, we've got this structure. I've got to do the dorsal ridge. Let's go back and figure out where that is. All right, so it crosses here, here, crosses about the 40% mark. This is there. And then I would be curious, I don't know if anyone watching has any background in discus. The dorsal ridge, it does something really interesting. Or the lateral line, it continues up here and then it drops down, maybe 20% down its body and continues. And I'm not sure if that's a trait that's common amongst all species of fish, and I've just never really noticed it because maybe they're small enough that it's harder to see, or whether or not that's something that is unique to a particular genus of fish. So yeah, I would, if anyone has any insight into that, I'd be very curious about it. Right, so that is our discus fish. I feel okay about it. I'm gonna lightly erase this line because it bothers me. There's nothing wrong with it, it doesn't look very good. That's less critical. And the same thing with this top line. This top line is less critical. I'm going to lighten it a little bit. And actually, once I'm happy with all of my markings, I will lighten everything by erasing absolutely everything on the page so that only I can see it, which is another pitfall of this whole process of how enjoyable is it to watch someone draw very slowly and also barely be able to see what they're doing. I don't know. It's an experiment. There's a reason why it's on my second channel. So, here we go. Got our discus fish. Let me cut to the full screen. I think that looks pretty convincing, honestly. And it's going to be a wild type discus. So there's going to be 9 vertical bars running from, I think the first one is its eye. Let me double check that. I'm pretty sure the first vertical bar is over its eye. I don't think it has one closer to the front of its head. Yeah, so it's got 1 vertical bar over its eye, and then 8 more vertical bars ending in a vertical bar on its tail. And they're very, very individual specific. They come out when they're more stressed, so I'm going to de-accentuate the vertical bars. They'll still be present, but they won't be as prominent as some wild types that you see. The body is going to be a pretty robust orangish red on its bottom and its top, with a lighter brownish orange in the center. Maybe hints of green here and there, because that's another key to illustrating fish properly, is that there's a bunch of different colors that you don't see initially. You don't realize like there's a bunch of greens, there's a bunch of yellows, even in something that seems like a pretty primary color. And then we're going to have some of these squiggles, which if I were a discus expert, I would know if there's a term that these squiggles are called. I don't know that, but all the squiggles on its forehead, I've kept them. I've kept discus, but I've never really thought about what are those squiggles called. And then over its dorsal fin, the squiggles kind of break apart. You end up with a beautiful, more solid blue or turquoise up here that gets more and more faint as it reaches the ends of the dorsal fin. And then the same is true of the anal fin. There's a little broken turquoise line that runs along the anal fin down here. And then finally, well, I guess the pectoral fins are pretty much transparent. They're a tough thing to illustrate. And then the ventral fin, the pelvic fins, are a much more robust red color. At least that's how I'm choosing to illustrate it. They often have a little bit of turquoise or blue hints of it. And that's really brought out in a lot of the domestic types. But that's kind of the overall structure. And then, of course, a bright red eye, because that to me is like the thing that really makes Discus pop, is the fact that they've got that bright red eye that often you can see a little bit of that bar, that vertical bar running through. So yeah, let's see. All right, I'm debating if I want to start the coloring process. Is that the thing that I'm going to do right now? That's what I'm struggling with. Just realizing that I wasn't on camera when I was describing all of that, and I don't know how much I was actually pointing to my illustration. All right. Well, the first step of this process is erasing stuff once I'm really happy with it. So I'm gonna just zoom in real close on the fish's face, get this Discus's mouth in a good spot. This feels like it's sitting a little bit low. Comes in a little bit. I've got a pretty prominent lower lip. Buckles over. And then they have a couple of folds, and these folds help them like to kind of like suck in and grab the food, rather than just like opening and closing their mouth. They kind of gulp. It's got its nostrils, which we'll see if I illustrate that or not. I'm still deciding how much detail I want to go into, because, you know, as you look at this fish, right, this is the detail that I want to get to. But let's see if I can zoom in and show you what I'm actually talking about here. So apologies for the shadow, but in some instances I've illustrated some of the individual scales, and sometimes I've kind of like let them blend together, and it really is very dependent on where in the fish those scales occur. So at the top of the Cardinal Tetra, the scales are much more prominent because there's not as much reflective material. So I've got to figure out exactly how much detail I want to get, based on how reflective the fish is, because the Cardinal Tetra is complicated, but it's nowhere near as complicated as Discus Fish. The Discus Fish has just so many more scales. So got to really decide how much detail I want to put into this fish. I think the Cardinal Tetra took me around 25 hours. Yeah, the Cardinal Tetra took me about 25 hours. The Cory took me probably around 20, maybe a little bit more. And then this unfinished Asian Arowana, I've probably put in 40 hours into it, and it's not done at all. So yeah, the Discus Fish, this could be a 60-hour illustration. More if I keep chit-chatting. All right. The thing that I like to start with often is the eye, because as soon as you get that eye, everything starts to really come alive, kind of working out from the eye. I kind of move in chunks, but that eye really allows you to see the humanity is the wrong term, but for lack of a better word, the humanity or the life within the fish. So that's often where I'll start, just so that I can feel, this is going to sound weird, but like a little bit of a connection to the illustration. I can feel like there's a creature there. It's not dead and flat. So yeah, that's something that I'm thinking about. So let's just going to pull up a bunch of other reference images. I have easily 50 discus fish open right now, photos of discus fish open, just to like figure out what is my reference point, what is the fish that I want to duplicate. Got various like really up close images, and then I've got wider images. So got my up close of an eye, and looking at it, the eye has a lot of really deep reds. It's also got quite a lot of yellow, and then it's got flecks of black, flecks of really deep red. But that the eye that I'm looking at right now is the eye of a captive bred discus. So I need to compare that to what does the eye of a wild discus look like. The wild discus certainly has a lot more black in that eye, but it still has a center. The center of the iris is ringed in gold or bright red in almost every instance, which is the case in most fish, that there's a pop that surrounds the pupil. That's the word I was looking for earlier. Just looking at a bunch of fish, figuring out what I want to do. Interesting. So in addition, the eye socket of the fish kind of moves around, and on the edges of that eye socket, it's usually quite silvery. So I'm also got to figure out what is the orientation that the fish is looking. Is it looking directly at the viewer, which means that you won't really see much of that silver, or is it looking slightly off center, which means that you'll get a little bit of a ring on whatever side is opposite the direction the fish is looking, because that socket kind of like wiggles around. All right. Let's dive into this process. What do I want to do? Also, what my general process for making these illustrations is just so many layers of pigment from the pigment from my pencils. So often it's quite repetitive. So I'm just gonna start getting out the various pencils that I'm thinking I might use, and shocker, there's gonna be a lot of them. So just getting out my yellows first. I know that I'm gonna have a couple of them. I want some really light yellows in the mix so that it really captures that iridescence. I want my vibrant reds. One of my favorite secret weapons is the very bright like fluorescent oranges and fluorescent yellows. The fluorescent colors really make things pop. If you add them just hints of them here and there, they bring the image to life. And it's something that I need to get more of, honestly. I need to get a couple more fluorescent colors, because I just don't have that many of them. I don't have like the fluorescent blue, for instance. I have to use a lot of whites and really light colors, and it would be great to have just the ability to have a pop pop of something. I often find I'm going to use a little bit of this very deep bluish color to add a little bit of accent, little flecks of color that end up in the iris. Let's see, maybe I'll add just a little bit of the light blue. Add some neutral into the mix. Yeah, that's a good enough starting point. So we'll just go into this shot. Let's see what we can do. Is this in focus? Well, now it's definitely not. There we go. All right. All right. Just looking around. I'm very nervous about laying down any color on this piece of paper, because, you know, that means that I've begun. So the reds tend to be on the sides, with the darker colors on the top and bottom. Just keep bouncing back between pulling up multiple different reference images to see exactly what's going on. The other thing that's interesting is each fish's eye is very different, but the light also dramatically changes what the eye looks like. This one looks like I like this eye a lot, so I'm just trying to make a mental, I'm going to say it out loud, that there's a darker patch right above the pupil, then a little patch at the edge of the iris, and then it kind of wraps around at the bottom of the pupil, and then again wraps around at the bottom of the iris. So I will just lightly color in with a red where most of the pigment's going to end up. Nice thing is that this is not based on any one individual fish, so I can kind of do what I want with my patterning as long as it's within the realm of possible. And the really great thing about the discus fish, again, versus a lot of the other fish that I've been illustrating, is that the discus fish have a lot more variability. There's a lot more creative license that I can take that I just can't with you know, a Cardinal Tetra. A Cardinal Tetra kind of looks the same no matter what Cardinal Tetra you're talking about. It basically is going to look the same. So you can see how slow this process really is, that this eye is going to take its sweet time to come together. I'm adding a little bit of the neon orange that will kind of pop through here and there and make you feel like the eye is luminescent a little bit. I know I've fallen silent, and I apologize for that. So I think the thing that people often miss about colored pencils is that it's not a one and done kind of thing. You don't lay down a color and then move on. You lay down just a bunch of pigment over and over and over until you get what you want. Because you don't want any of the texture of the paper peeking through. You want the pigment to be the only thing that's really visible. And as tempting as it is, fish generally don't have a reflective glint in their eye the way that people do. Sometimes there's a little bit of refraction that happens inside the pupil itself, but that's about as close as you're going to get. There's really nothing that's going to bounce off to make this feel spherical. So really, I've got to play with making the color come alive in this thing. I've got to make sure that it feels like there's an iris that's bouncing light around, that things are kind of playing in weird ways. I'm going to color in the interior of it so that it looks a little bit better. And they're also, it's not a perfectly circular iris. They're a little bit oval shaped, a little bit pointed towards the mouth, just a hair. It's not dramatic, but it's just a little bit. There's just a little something going on there. Let's see. I want to bring out that edge a little bit more. Just keep laying down colors. Oop. Can actually kind of blend a little bit with the colored pencils. Dark ring that I was talking about earlier. All right. Nope, my pencil's broke right at the tip. Let me sharpen it up. This is the high drama that you're going to get here. You sharpen it with a pencil. It's pretty exciting stuff. All right. So yeah, I mean, there's a reason. This is really the reason why I started the second channel, was because I wanted the freedom to do stuff like this, knowing that most people are not going to find this terribly compelling. And that's fine. Most people might check in for 2 or 3 minutes, say, oh, that's kind of cool, and move on with their lives. But I still wanted to document the process because I think it's really a fun process to get to know the fish. I feel like I have a much better understanding of each individual species once I've done this a little bit. Once I've kind of played in the shape of their body a little bit, and really gotten an understanding of exactly what's going on. And there's so much more speckling that happens that I don't think people expect. That these fish, it's just a bunch of little teeny packets of pigment, probably, I don't actually know. I know how squid pigments work, and I don't think that's quite how fish pigments work. But it's not like a solid color. There's so much going on there. And that's so interesting, and it's something that really has heightened my appreciation of the fish species. All right, so once there's more stuff surrounding it, I think this eye will start to make more sense, and I'll refine it a little bit. But we've got to start to this process. We've got to start with a single eye staring at us. Yeah. Let's see, just checking in on the chat. Geez, Tank's impressive work. If only my hands weren't so shaky, I'd love to get into stuff like this. Yeah, I mean, I feel very lucky that my hands are quite stable or steady. I mean, I don't know how painful it is to illustrate or anything like that, but I would just encourage you to, tinker with stuff and see what you like and what you don't like, because at the end of the day, like, art is about expressing yourself rather than actually achieving something in specific or in particular. Omar says, hi. I didn't know you were also an artist. Illustrations look on point. Can't wait to see it finished. Me either. So I'm going to take this offline, I think, right around now, and I'm going to build out a little bit more so that there's something to look at. So maybe I'll spend another 2 or 3 hours illustrating, either this evening or maybe tomorrow, and then I'll come back on the live stream again once things are a little bit more established. And realistically, doing a single fin is going to be more than one live stream. Doing the tail is probably one live stream. So this is going to be a long process. We'll see whether or not people like this. I mean, I know that this is really a not aquarium content, but in the future, this is really late in the process, but this is in the future. I'm happy to wax poetic about any questions anyone has, or any topics that people want me to just kind of like talk about, because there's only so much describing of intimately drawing a fish that I can do. And I might even move this camera a little bit lower so that it's really, really close to the camera, or to the fish illustration in the future. We'll see. So thanks to everyone for stopping by, hanging out with me this evening. Been streaming for about an hour and 50 minutes. So I will see you next time, and look for this. I'm going to try to do these streams once or twice a week, just so that I have a reason to continue doing these illustrations. So with that, I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening, morning, night, wherever you are in the world, and I will see you